Welcome to PrimeAlpha's interview series, insights from industry practitioners discussing their journey and their discoveries. Hello, my name is Amanda Jogia, the CEO of PrimeAlpha, an online ecosystem bringing together alternative opportunities and their investors. I would like to introduce Jonas Martenson, the founder of Res Capital, which is an alternative investment manager focusing on U.S. life insurance policies. Their fund, Res Life Investments, celebrates its 10th anniversary in 2021. Congratulations and welcome, Jonas.
Thank you so much, Amanda. Really great to be here.
Happy to have you. Really excited to have this conversation about your firm and around life settlements. So let's get started. So tell us about your career journey.
I've been working quite a lot abroad. I'm originally from Sweden, but pretty much straight after university, where I studied business, I started working in Switzerland. In Switzerland, I worked with electronic options exchanges, learned a lot about the market and derivatives, and worked in Zurich in Switzerland for 1 year. After that, together with the Swiss company where I was working, I founded a fund management company in Luxembourg. The aim was really to utilize our know-how in options trading and derivatives to offer equity and bond funds using options to produce slightly higher returns, like covered call strategy. So together with a few other founders, we lived in Brussels, but the fund was actually based in Luxembourg. Didn't really take off, but I got very keen to try again. So eventually we decided to close down the fund, and I moved to London, where I started working with Schroders, one of the largest fund managers in the UK. Together with my wife and children, we lived in London for about 10 years. And I worked at some of the major investment banks, such as Merrill Lynch and Bear Stearns. No one exists any longer, or Merrill Lynch being now Bank of America. Had a really interesting 10 years in London, but then eventually moved back to Sweden to set up Res Capital. And we're now celebrating our 10th anniversary. The fund has been up and running for 10 years, so it feels quite fantastic that we've succeeded this time.
That's fantastic. So describe that pivotal point in time where you decided to go off on your own and where you saw this opportunity in the market, and definitely touch on that unique structure that you guys have.
Yeah, I think when I was working at Merrill Lynch in London, I came across life settlements as an asset class. This is, before the financial crisis, so in, early 2000. The asset class was then quite unknown, not very mature. Merrill Lynch never got involved, but quite a few other investment banks did get involved in life settlements, such as Credit Suisse, Deutsche Bank, Goldman Sachs, etc. But the financial crisis of 2008 really changed that, because banks were pretty much ordered by the regulator to clean up their balance sheet, to dispose of non-core assets. So the life settlements market at that time shrank in size. And I would say that most investment banks got out of this asset class. And this is pretty much the time when I decided that maybe now is actually a good time to try to launch a life settlements fund. The market is pretty much split in two different segments since 2008. You have the very large players such as Apollo, Blackstone, etc. And then you have the smaller niche players, which are pretty much buying single policies. And the larger players tend to buy portfolios in the tertiary market, as we call it, while the smaller niche players, such as Res Capital, we buy single policies in the secondary market. So that's pretty much what happened since the financial crisis.
It's so interesting. And what happens? I mean, what's the evolution been since kind of 2008 till now in the last decade?
I think the interesting thing is that the market has become more well known in the US. We now have endowments, pension funds investing with these larger US based firms such as Apollo, etc. So the asset class is much more well known and accepted among institutional investors in the US. That's not really the case yet in Europe. It's kind of happening a little bit more slower here. And I think this is, around this time that I thought, okay, if this works in the US and the asset class is really taking off in the US and even more so these days, then it should be able to work in Europe also for European investors. And this is kind of around, 2010, 2012 that we started to look at this asset class. So I think this is really the point in time where I decided this should work for European investors as well. And that has been the case. We're very happy that we have among our investors such as the Volvo pension fund, for example.
So I think this is a really interesting asset class. Like, I always think about, our funds and clients being investors. So how do you help your investors?
It's really a unique asset class. It's for us, it's very much an alternative to fixed income. If we can produce like 7 to 8% net in US dollars with about 4% volatility, then that's really interesting risk-adjusted returns. But also, I think the risk profile is very interesting. We buy US life insurance policies, we pay premiums, and pretty much nothing happens until a policy pays out. So the return profile is very much flat until a policy pays out, and then you have an increase in the net asset value. And this is, of course, opposite to, for example, cat bonds. It's also going to be quite countercyclical to investors that own equities, bonds, real estate. So I think the fact that life settlements, which is linked to mortality, really offers a risk diversification and a return profile which is not linked to the general economy. We saw that in March when COVID-19 hit, everyone started to run away last year. Equity markets collapsed, but I mean, our returns, nothing happened. It was pretty flat. So I think that's what we deliver to our investors, because most of our investors, they already own equities, bonds, real estate, etc. And a lot of them own hedge funds, which unfortunately sometimes don't deliver uncorrelated returns either.
So since starting your firm, how have you developed or pivoted your thesis or business, and why?
We've tried to become more international in our client base. We realized quite early on that our Scandinavian investors, who are mainly pension funds and family offices, they obviously have wished to receive their return in the local currency, Swedish krona or euros, depending on where they're based. So we decided to try to target investors who are also looking for returns in US dollars, where the currency hedge is not kind of a big issue. So we took a decision to start traveling in mainly to Switzerland, Singapore, bit the UK, limited amount in the US, where we have some of our largest competitors. So we tend to focus more on Europe and the Far East. And that has been very successful for us because we suddenly have a large number of investors from Singapore, as an example. And many of them are US dollars based. It's part of their kind of asset mix, currency mix. So we find that that's been a good decision that we took a few years back.
I always think about our fund managers as entrepreneurs. So, we always talk about like, what did you get wrong and what did we learn? But I personally want to ask, what did you get right?
I think what we did right is I was really able to recruit very competent colleagues, experienced colleagues. I mean, as an example, our CEO came from one of the largest public pension funds in Sweden, AP3. So he has been on the buy side for 25, 30 years and has fantastic experience in asset allocation, knows a lot about alternative investments, set up this pension fund's, ILS team. So he knows pretty much everything there is to know about asset allocation. Our fund manager, as another example, he's been involved since we launched the fund, very quantitative, which I'm not. So we complement each other very well within the team. We're only 7 employees and soon 8. But I think what's been very important for me as the founder of the company has been to recruit very competent, experienced people that complement my own profile. And I've been very fortunate in having these colleagues on board since many years now.
So going back to you, this is a good segue. I love this question. So, what do you think is your superpower?
Yeah, I like the question, and I think that I will probably say that my superpower is that I'm really stubborn, which perhaps is not the obvious superpower. But if you're an entrepreneur, it's quite important to never give up, and you end up thinking, oh, this is going to take probably twice as long as I thought it would take. It's going to cost 100% more in terms of the money that I need to spend. Most entrepreneurs realize that you need to raise capital, additional capital from perhaps what you initially thought. So I think my superpower perhaps is being stubborn and never wanting to give up. And I think that probably is true for many other entrepreneurs as well. The other superpower I think that many entrepreneurs have is that you have to be good at understanding and listen to people. And it's not only being able to raise capital to found your own firm. It's also being able, of course, to listen to investors, to understand what are their needs. And lucky for us, we have very long-term investors who generally tend to invest with us for 10 years or longer. And we have very few redemptions now that we are celebrating our 10th anniversary. So I think that's also perhaps maybe not a superpower at least, but something which is good to have.
Thank you so much, Jonas. We will drop Jonas's contact information into this podcast. Thank you for your time. It's such an interesting asset class and definitely worth pursuing.
Thank you so much, Amanda. I really appreciate speaking to you, and thank you so much.